Welcome to this explainer. Usually when we think about a car engine, it feels like predictable mechanical math, right? Fuel goes in, power comes out. But today, we are going to uncover how a massive, environmentally driven national fuel policy inadvertently created a highly profitable aftermarket goldmine for India's automotive giants. The reality under your hood is far less predictable than you might think. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at India's FY26 automotive boom, diving into the spare parts mystery, unpacking the E20 fuel mandate and its mechanical impact, exploring this massive 1 lakh crore aftermarket, and finally, peering into the electric future. All right, let's kick things off with part 1, India's FY26 automotive boom. To really grasp this hidden gold mine, we've got to first look at the sheer volume of cars flooding out of showrooms right now. Look at these numbers. Original equipment manufacturers, our OEMs like Maruti Suzuki, Tata Motors, and Mahindra, are absolutely crushing it with historic, record-breaking revenue. Maruti is moving over 2.4 million units to hit 1.74 lakh crore rupees. Tata is right behind at 1.42 lakh crore, and Mahindra is at 1.09 lakh crore. These companies are securing incredibly healthy operating margins above 10%. And in a heavy industry dealing with steel and aluminum costs, that is truly phenomenal. To put that boom into perspective, just look at this stat. Following a strategic demerger, Tata Motors' commercial vehicle segment hit a jaw-dropping 72.3% return on capital employed. For context, getting a 15 to 20% ROCE in heavy truck manufacturing is considered a huge win. But hitting 72.3%, that's a number you'd normally expect from a lean, agile software startup, not a company building massive heavy-duty trucks. So that brings us to part 2, the spare parts mystery. Because when we actually dig deeper into those massive profits and look past the shiny new vehicles, we find a quiet, highly lucrative secondary engine driving these companies forward. It's kind of like the classic printer and ink cartridge business model, right? You sell the printer at a reasonable price, but you make your real money on the ink. Look at Maruti Suzuki's revenue breakdown. They generated nearly 13% of their total revenue purely from selling replacement parts, and another 4.5% from services to nearly 30 million vehicles. And that 13% spare parts slice, that translates to an astounding 22,668 crore rupees. Just let that sink in for a second. Over 22,000 crores just from replacement parts. Plus, that segment alone is growing at a rapid 13% year over year. They aren't just a car manufacturer anymore. They're basically running a highly lucrative parts and service subscription model. And hey, this isn't just a Maruti thing. This is a coordinated industry-wide pattern acting as a strategic buffer against raw material inflation. Everyone's getting in on it. Hyundai hit over 8,400 crores in spares, Tata Motors over 18,600, even two-wheeler giants like Bajaj Auto are seeing massive spikes. Heck, Mahindra's tractor spares alone brought in over 1,300 crores. When commodity prices go up, OEMs use these incredibly high-margin spare parts, which often hit 40 to 50% margins, to completely absorb the shock. So, as detectives trying to solve this financial mystery, we have to ask the crucial question, why? Why is the wear and tear on existing vehicles suddenly accelerating so rapidly? The vehicles haven't fundamentally changed, so why are the service centers suddenly overflowing with demand for replacement parts? Let's find out in part 3, the E20 fuel mandate. To find our culprit, we actually need to look away from the factories and look directly at your local fuel pump. We're talking about a 25-year energy transition that has literally rewritten the chemistry of Indian roads. For years, the government's ethanol-blended petrol program was stalled out, mainly because it relied entirely on sugarcane. But in 2018, driven by a brilliant strategy to widen raw material sourcing to include maize and surplus grain, the government aggressively accelerated the program. They ramped up blending year after year, and by 2026, they hit the nationwide 20%, or E20 target, an incredible 5 years ahead of their original 2030 deadline. And honestly, you can totally see why they rushed it. The macroeconomic benefits are undeniable. This policy effectively operates as a masterclass energy security play disguised as a massive domestic agricultural wealth transfer. India saved 1.97 lakh crore in foreign exchange, substituted 316 lakh tons of crude oil, massively reduced CO2 emissions, and transferred 1.6 lakh crore rupees directly into the hands of Indian farmers.
For the national economy, it is a picture-perfect scenario. But there's a catch, which brings us to part 4, ethanol's mechanical impact.
While the national macroeconomics are perfect, the mechanical reality for millions of older internal combustion engines tells a very different, much more destructive story. Let's break down the actual science of this fuel trade-off. Now, E20 is chemically fantastic for reducing engine knocking because it has a higher effective octane of around 95. However, ethanol physically contains less energy than pure petrol. Because of this lower energy density, your engine has to burn more fuel to generate the exact same horsepower. The result? A guaranteed 3 to 5% drop in your mileage.
But poor mileage wouldn't cause engines to completely break down, right? The real mechanical damage happens because ethanol is highly hygroscopic and a strong solvent. What does that mean? It means it acts like a sponge, absorbing water right out of the air, which then rusts your metallic fuel lines. And simultaneously, as a solvent, it works like chemical sandpaper to literally eat away at the rubber hoses, the gaskets, and the engine seals of older, non-compliant cars. The true tipping point happened in April 2026. Oil companies and the government completely withdrew pure E10 fuel from the market simply because it was too expensive to maintain separate underground tanks. So, overnight, drivers with older, non-compliant vehicles had absolutely no choice but to pump E20 into their tanks. This massively accelerated that chemical wear cycle, dissolving their rubber parts and forcing them right back to authorized dealers just to preserve their warranties. Which leads us straight into part 5, the 1 lakh crore aftermarket. This forced widespread integration of ethanol into older engines is the exact catalyst pushing the Indian automotive aftermarket into unprecedented financial territory. The OEMs certainly aren't complaining because this accelerated wear cycle is turbocharging their balance sheets. Fueled by this chemically accelerated wear and tear, the domestic aftermarket alone grew to a staggering 1 lakh crore rupee behemoth, specifically 99,948 crore rupees in FY25. Guys, that is an $11.8 billion ecosystem built entirely on replacement parts and services. And this 1 lakh crore ecosystem touches everything from massive, continuous, repeat demand for tires and batteries to modern digital fleet platforms monitoring millions of connected trucks for Tata and Eicher. Plus, consumers are terrified of third-party parts frying their complex car computers, so they stick strictly to authorized centers. This makes the entire aftermarket beautifully counter-cyclical. Even if a recession hits and new car sales drop, people still have to maintain their older cars, guaranteeing that OEMs generate wealth no matter what the economic weather looks like. Finally, let's look ahead in part 6, the electric future. This 1 lakh crore rupee bubble is fundamentally building the bridge to our electric future. Ethanol is, at its core, a bridge. It allows the government to instantly decarbonize the roughly 350 million internal combustion vehicles already on the road. But the ultimate master strategy here is that automakers are utilizing the massive cash flow generated by this aftermarket boom to heavily fund their future electric vehicle platforms and battery tech. We're already seeing the results. Ashok Leyland's Switch Mobility saw e-bus volumes surge by 238%, and TVS is aggressively rolling out battery as a service. But that leaves us with a fascinating and maybe slightly terrifying thought to end on. Because EVs don't have spark plugs, fuel filters, or engine oil, they have a fraction of the moving parts. So as we inevitably transition to electric, this massive spares goldmine will eventually vanish, which leaves us to wonder, will this 1 lakh crore aftermarket simply burst? Or will automakers find a way to monetize electric vehicle software and battery degradation just as ruthlessly and brilliantly as they did the ethanol transition? Keep that in mind the next time you take your car in for a service. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.